Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to be talking about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 202. Today's episode is going to take a look at the other three elemental bending abilities that I hadn't yet covered. I had already covered Firebending in Tough Rules episode 199, and now that the set has been in players' hands, I've noticed some other tricky situations involving those three other abilities, so I'm going to help try to clear those up today. And if there are any other situations and card interactions that you've encountered, then please ask those down in the comments below and I'll help you out with them. This episode will be pretty dense, as it's covering three different abilities. There's going to be a whole lot of CR citations, so be sure to check the video's description for references to those rules. Let's start with Earthbending, as I've seen more decks integrating that into already existing lands decks, as well as more new decks being built around Earthbending. There were a lot of questions that I saw about the card Ultima, and why it's so good against Earthbending, since not even cards like Farewell are good against the earth-bended lands. I'll get to the answer on this in just a bit, but first, another interaction I saw some questions about. It ties into this as well. I saw questions about how those auras that cause their enchanted objects to lose all other abilities works with the earth-bended lands. In some cases, it was an earth-bended land getting enchanted with one of those auras, and then in some cases, it was an enchantment that turns the creature into a land and makes them lose those abilities, and then earthbending that creature that has now become a land. So let's see what the comprehensive rules says about earthbending, and we will find that in CR 701.66a, it says that Earthbend in means target land you control becomes a 0/0 land creature with haste in addition to its other types. Put in +1/+1 counters on it. When that land dies or is put into exile, return it to the battlefield tapped under your control. So the important part there is that the Earthbend ability has a delayed triggered ability built into it. I've covered these in the past, and you can find more about them in CR 603.7 and its 8 subrules, but the important thing to know is that this is not a triggered ability that is given to the creatures. This is why the auras that remove their other abilities do not stop the enchanted object from coming back. This ability isn't one on the creature for it to be removed. This delayed triggered ability is also why Ultima is great against Earthbend. When Ultima ends the turn, it pseudo counters the method of bringing them back, which is a triggered ability. We can see in CR 723.1, as well as some of the sub-rules in there. There's a whole bunch. Go check it out if you do want some more information about this kind of stuff. But essentially, what it all boils down to is that those abilities triggering to bring those lands / creatures, but mostly lands, to bring them back when they are destroyed, those will be waiting. They will have triggered during the process of Ultima resolving. However, they have to wait until that spell fully resolves before they would actually go to the stack. But because the Ultima is ending the turn, it will end that turn before they even get a chance for their triggers to go to the stack. They will just cease to exist. So do be sure to check that out, or check out some of my other videos on delayed triggered abilities to see some information more about that. Now, this is different with something like this Abdel Adrian. When the Ultima destroys him, he will bring back the card that he exiled, as it's not a triggered ability that brings it back, but it is a one-shot effect, and this is not something that is going to be using the stack. Okay, now for airbending, I haven't seen too much confusion on this except around this being an alternative cost to casting spells, which means that effects that adjust the cost to cast the spell do impact it. Things that make it increase in cost will apply. Things that reduce the cost will apply. And importantly, you cannot mix this with other alternative costs, such as mutate, bestow, or prototype, etc., those other kinds of alternative costs. And this also means that if you're casting something with X in its cost, then the value of X must be 0. You do not have a choice in that. Now, some of these airbend effects even let you target a spell that is on the stack, not just a permanent that is already on the battlefield. This means that if you were to overload a Cyclonic Rift and they cast Aang's Swift Savior in response to airbend that instant spell while it's unstacked, then when you do cast it from exile later for just the 2 generic mana, you will not be able to overload it again. The 2 generic mana is already an alternative cast cost, and to the overload. Sorry if I'm a little loopy. I'm still a little sick from before. If you guys are wondering why I didn't get a video up last week, I was coughing like crazy. My throat was killing me. My voice was not great. And again, I was just coughing a lot. And it would have been a horrible time to edit that much coughing. So yeah, still a little loopy ever since then. But yeah, so yeah, that 2 generic mana is already an alternative cost to the overload. So it will, when you do cast it later, it will have to be the baby rift version of that rift, only doing 1 target. Now, there is one card in particular that I do want to cover in regards to airbending, as I see it becoming a hugely popular card. It still blows my mind that I don't see a card like Winds of Abandon being played more often, as it's a one-sided exile creature board wipe. I guess the ramping that it does for your opponents, and then the 6 mana cost of it scares players from using it, but that seems super fair for the effect of a one-sided exile board wipe. Whatever. Having said that, Avatar's Wrath is also a sorcery that exiles creatures via airbending them, and this time now it's only 4 mana rather than 6 mana. It also does hit your own creatures, but you can get them back for cheap, which is why it's great to re-trigger all of your ETBs. The best part is that it does kind of feel like a one-sided board wipe because of the until your next turn, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hand aspect of the card. This is wild. Even just a card that for 4 mana says your opponents can't cast anything from not hand until your next turn, that's pretty good. But the creatures that your opponents airbend, they'll be cut off because you'd be casting them from exile. They're commanders. They can't cast them from command zone. That's a whole turn. If you get this out pretty early, that's a whole turn of your opponents not being able to cast their commanders from the command zone. Pretty wild. Decks that use those red and black exile effects to be able to exile cards from the top of their library or their opponent's library and then be able to cast them, that gets shut off for a whole turn. And even powerful effects like Cascade get shut off for an entire turn. Pretty wild. Now, the part that I wanted to cover, though, is what happens if the player that casts Avatar's Wrath loses the game, or maybe they have to scoop for some reason. As long as they're leaving the game, what means that means that the game will not get to do their next turn for when their opponents can once again cast spells from non-hand zones. So do they just get locked down for the rest of the game, or does the effect end instantly right then and there once they have left the game? Luckily, there is a rule to cover this, and it is in CR 800.4M that says, when a player leaves the game, any continuous effects with durations that last until that player's next turn or until a specific point in that turn will last until that turn would have begun. They neither expire immediately nor last indefinitely. Additionally, if you control the card Avatar Aang, which draws you a card for each time you've airbended, and then you cast Avatar's Wrath, it sadly doesn't matter how many other creatures you airbend. You will only end up drawing the 1 card. Funny enough, literally as I was writing up my script for this video, one of the players from my LGS asked about this on Discord, so I was able to give them a quick reply, and that is CR 701.65B. And finally, waterbending. There is a rule in the comprehensive rules I wanted to cover, and it is CR 701.67B that says, If a Waterbend cost is part of the total cost to cast a spell or activate an ability, usually because the Waterbend cost itself is an additional cost, the alternate method to pay for mana described in Rule 701.67a may be used only to pay for the amount of generic mana in the Waterbend cost, even if the total cost to cast that spell or activate that ability includes other generic mana components. What this means is that if you cast Spirit Water Revival, which costs a generic mana and 2 blue, but then it also has that Waterbend for 6 generic, you can only tap 6 things down to pay for that 6 Waterbend cost. You cannot tap a 7th permanent down to help pay for the 1 generic mana in the mana cost of the card itself. Similarly, if a card like this Thalia is out that increases the costs of casting certain spells, you cannot tap down permanents via Waterbending to help pay for this cost increaser on Thalia. And in a similar vein, if you have this Katara out and you want to activate her X cost Waterbending ability, but there is a suppression field out, then you cannot tap 2 permanents to help pay for that field's cost increase to that ability. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta.